College. Your sophomore year. Do you remember your sophomore year in college? Raise your hand if you remember your sophomore year in college. All right, maybe you were 19, which is what I was as a sophomore in college. And now imagine being 19 as a sophomore and given the opportunity to build your own place and live in it rent-free for the remainder of your school years there. That is what happened to me in 1983. I got an opportunity to build a cabin and live in it. It cost me about $1,000 to build the cabin. And this was not part of my original college plan by any stretch of the imagination. What happened was I was a sophomore, and by the spring of my sophomore year, I was completely lost. I just could not figure out how I fit into the rest of the world. And I decided that the way to get clarity to do that was to do something really difficult and challenging. And that's when I met a guy named Eddie. And Eddie had some property about 10 miles away from campus. And he said, you should come build a cabin and live in it. So a little background, I grew up in the Washington, D.C. suburbs. You see that doghouse there? That's what my experience was before building a cabin. That's right. So I was uniquely prepared for this challenge. So about a month before school let out, I went in, cleared the property, this little plot of land, and then I started working on the foundation. And what you see here are 12 locust posts that are buried in the ground about 3 feet, and then these oak trees that I managed to use ramps to get them up on top of there. And then I started working on the floor joists. The floor joists were supposed to be poplar trees, but there was a problem because I really didn't know what a poplar tree was. I was told that a poplar tree, I'd never paid attention. What's the difference between a poplar tree and a maple tree and a pine tree? Now I needed to know. But I started to have to level these things out. And all of the logs that you see here, I dragged through the woods by hand. I just tied a rope and pulled them into place and used a ramp to get it in. And you can see that it's starting to level out. And this was a lot of intense work right here. And you can see all the chips there. In order to be fully committed, I moved out of the dorm, put all my stuff in storage, and moved to the building site and lived in this tent with the tarp over top of it. I was afraid that if I had a place to go, I'd bail, is what I was afraid that would happen. So every day I woke up from my tent, and that's what I got to look at. This was the building process, and you can see it's starting to level out. And I would walk out and work as early as I could and work until the very end of the day. It was exhausting. I remember just sleeping so soundly at night as I worked. What you're looking at here is the equivalent of my moon landing that summer. These boards were sawn just about 2 miles away at a mobile sawmill, and they were trees the day before. I hauled them up here on the racks on my Subaru little station wagon, and I started building. Now, I had never been so exhausted, dirty, and hungry on a daily basis as this project. I would occasionally drive into Blacksburg and borrow a shower from a friend of mine, and I would always have to clean the tub out because I was that filthy. And so every day I got to learn something new. The first wall that I built and pushed into place, it immediately fell apart because I had used the wrong kind of nails. They were too small. And so how do you frame a window? How do you frame for a door? I didn't know. I just went to the library and started looking. And so I started to, when I needed a ladder, when it was time to work on the roof, I looked around and I built a ladder, first ladder I'd ever built. And that ladder right there, my wife likes to laugh at it, it actually lasted me for 3 years. It was heavy as all get out, but I started to look at the world a little bit differently when I started to be able to build things right when I needed them. And the tools that I used, 90% of the work that you see here was done with just these 3 tools: a small chainsaw, and a small axe and a hammer. And that's all I really owned. And you know, I used some nails, of course. But it started to help me realize that I could be creative in how I solve problems. This picture here was taken the same day that I nearly, I think, killed myself by accident. I was being careless on the roof. I was getting about a week or 2 away from school starting. I was trying to finish before the fall classes start, and I almost fell off the roof with my chainsaw in hand running. This is a remarkable photo for me. It may not look like it to you, but do you see what's coming off of the roof there? It's rain. It was the first time I didn't have to run back to my campsite to avoid the rain. And I thought, this was the first time I thought, I've built something here. When the adventure of building the cabin ended, the adventure of living in the cabin started. The first winter, I nearly froze. I just didn't have enough firewood. I didn't understand how to prepare for firewood. I never used a wood stove. I contaminated some of my drinking water that I brought. I got violently ill. Animals would sometimes make it into the cabin, and I had to deal with that. But over time, this cabin became a quite comfortable home for me. And I started to be able to take in the lessons, and they became almost as important as what I was learning in college. And again, I was a full-time student at Virginia Tech. There were many firsts that year. First time or not just year, the first 3 years I lived there, I grew a beard. I had never built and used an outhouse before. I had never lived without electricity, running water, or a telephone. So there were so many firsts that I just the experience felt like it was just so rich. I moved out after 3 years, graduated, and Eddie, who owned the property, would occasionally have people living in the cabin to keep it in use every once in a while. In 2010, I returned with my 2 children so that they could see what I built. And I saw that the cabin was in a bad shape, and it reminded me of a book that I love, The Giving Tree, and it reminded me that my cabin had given its all and it was returning to earth. Thank you.